Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here today. My name is Kelly Tatham. I'm your host, and today we have a very special guest, Kia Zahrabi. Kia is an engineer and an artist, as well as an organizer, doing arts events and also political events. He last weekend was part of a team who put on the 1 year anniversary rally for Mahsa Amini, who was killed on September 16th by the Iranian regime for not wearing a hijab. Kia, thank you for being here and thank you for sharing your time with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks for your interest in yeah, wanting to talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. I wanted to get your perspective and talk about what's really going on at the ground, but also talk about the bigger picture and help people understand a bit more of the history because we see these things reported in the news, but there's unfortunately a lot of horrifying things happening in the world. And so it's hard for us to focus in sometimes and really tangibly understand what's going on and what it means to us and how we can move forward together as a global community to right these wrongs. And so I wanted to call attention to what happened to Massa and what's happening to people in Iran every day. It's my understanding that people are still being executed every day by the so-called morality police for not wearing headscarves, for speaking up, for simply just existing in this regime.
Yeah. So as far as I think what you said at the very beginning, like with so Mahsa Amini, she was visiting Tehran. She lived in another region of Iran, and she was visiting with her family. It wasn't that she wasn't wearing the hijab. She actually had the headscarf. I guess she had a little bit of hair showing, which is typical. A lot of women do that, or maybe that her pants were not long enough, or something like that. So there's a lot of ridiculous dress code requirements, and so they found whatever reason they stopped her, and yeah, they detained her, and then they actually beat her to death into a coma, and she died. So that was a big controversy because at first the governments obviously denied it, and but it was proven that not in the courts, but it was proven there was clear evidence. Everyone was the doctor that treated her, people that witnessed it, that she was beaten to death. And so yeah, so in Iran, this has always been an issue since the start of the Islamic Revolution, which was in 1979. And So there's strict dress code in place. And yes, the morality police, they come and they'll harass and they'll detain people. They'll take them to these centers where Mahsa Amini was sent. Supposedly, is like a training facility where they teach women how to follow the dress code or whatever, right? Um, and So yeah, that's still going on. We've seen this. I mean, there's always acts of defiance. There's always people that are protesting against it. I mean, it happened. There's many cases that's happened over the past 44 years. But in the past year, for sure, it's been another big uprising, amplification of this energy, this oppressiveness that people are being weighed down, and like eventually, it's like they say that the ashes, like the fire is still burning below the ashes. That's what they always refer to with all these uprisings, is that the fire is maybe look like it's out, but it continues to there's still it's still glowing, and it's still people are heated, and they're tired of it, and they want change. So
Yeah, I think that's something that is important to recognize that this revolution has been ongoing for decades
yeah.
and that that there was a different political system in place. It's only been 44 years that the Islamic regime has been putting these laws in order, been oppressing people in this specific way, and specifically women with what they're allowed to wear and not allowed to wear, and how they show up. And um, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what the political landscape was in Iran before this regime took over and touch on the history of Islam in the country.
Sure. Yeah. By no means am I an expert on any of this, because my knowledge of some of the history is only like fairly recent, that I've been learning more. But like the prior to the Islamic Revolution was the monarchy, which is the Pahlavi dynasty. There've been there'd been previous dynasties before the Pahlavi dynasty, which is like the Qajar was right before. But the Pahlavi dynasty started, I want to say, like around World War One, when Reza Khan at the time became Reza Shah. He took over and once the started the Pahlavi dynasty. He obviously there was a lot of influence from other countries and occupation from by the UK and Russia and then later US and but so Reza Shah was in power leading into 1953, which was the rise of Mossadegh, which was he was a popular figure, heavily involved in politics in his early years. He went away for a while, came back, and this was Iran going towards nationalization of their resources, primarily oil, and that obviously was not going to help the UK and other people that had they're invested in Iran. So what happened was the CIA ran the first ever CIA coup to overthrow a government. So the US had previously overthrown governments, but this was the first time that the CIA was established right after World War II. So this was their first actual act of overthrowing a government. And so they got rid of Mossadegh, and that was Iran's real opportunity at democracy, secular democracy, which is what they're asking for still to this day. So following Mossadegh and that coup came Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, who was the son of Reza Shah. He came into power and he ruled the country until the end of the 70s when the Islamic Revolution took place. But the time during the monarchy, the Pahlavi dynasty, was a time of modernity. A lot of people refer to Reza Shah as being someone who, he invested in things like the railroads and building steel factories and getting expertise from other parts of the world. And so it was a place where people would vacation from other countries, very European, very modern. There was no strict dress code on what women should wear. It was fairly more, I guess you could say, more liberal than what's in place right now in Iran.
Right. So even though it was a monarchy, it wasn't oppressive. It wasn't suffocating. People were enjoying life and having access to the things you need to thrive.
Yeah. So again, that's maybe I wouldn't go as far to say that everybody was happy-go-lucky. I think, and again, I never lived there, but my parents, my mom especially, has very good memories of growing up in Iran at that time. There were definitely other groups, minority groups. I mean, the Kurdish people have always been oppressed. And they never had their say or been a part of the government, in their decision making. So yeah, there were definitely some area, and the Shah, who was very modern and everything, was still pretty ruthless towards anyone that anybody basically that would mess with his rule. So if there was any kind of forces from like Kurdish freedom fighters or like nationalists that wanted to separate not separate, but like have more power, the Shah would act towards that too, and they're against the Baha'is as well as a minority faith. There's been stories for sure. It's really like, I mean, it's politics, and so it wasn't totally perfect. Let's put it that way. But yeah, again, like generally, especially when you look at kind of current times in Iran, a lot of people look back and say, wow, that was actually much better scenario than what they have now.
Yeah, absolutely. As you're talking, it made me think about living in Canada today, and I'm not comparing the two. I'm just saying, like, there's even when we have access and privilege and so many abilities, there's still horrible things going on and people being oppressed, and there's always so many dynamics at play. Nowhere in the world has anyone, at least in modern memory.
Yeah, you're not going to have a perfect system. You're not going to have someone that treats everybody, and not everyone's going to be happy with the ruler, and who's in charge, for sure, and the decisions being made.
Yeah.
Sure.
But something has changed. Something changed dramatically in Iran 44 years ago. Like, there's a long history of it sounds like upheaval and ongoing political dynamics. And you were saying to me before we started recording about the Islamic religion coming in about 1700 years ago. And so having a very, very long history in that country, but the country having its own religion and its own culture and its own empire predating all of that. So there's just so much, there's such a trajectory to where it is today, or where it's been in the last half century, that is so dramatically different from the rest of its history.
Yeah, especially I mean when you compare a country like Canada. I mean, the First Nations people obviously have been here for much longer, but you know, in Iran, there's been rulers and people trying to occupy, and just like it's wild how much history there is, and all the events that have taken place, you know, to get to where we are. So it's good. I mean, for me, I love to learn about history. I'm fascinated by it, and so to learn more about, you know, the area where, you know, my ancestors are from, kind of thing, is even more, you know, satisfying, kind of thing, I guess you could say, and it helps to paint the picture of what's taking place, because I never had any formal education about the history in Iran. My friends that I've gotten to know, people that come out to the protests and stuff, they all grew up in Iran, so they have like a real strong knowledge for these things, because a lot of that stuff's been taught to them growing up, and it's just kind of around them, you know. So yeah.
It's I'll just touch on this briefly because sometimes on this podcast we talk about alchemy, and it's through my studies of alchemy that I've learned about Zoroastrianism, and been very curious to learn more of that. I've just started reading this book, In Search of Zarathustra, and it talks about how Nietzsche discovered his teachings, and then kind of through his perspective then put them out into the world. So a lot of people through philosophy know these ideas of like God is dead, based on what Nietzsche's interpretation, but below that, you know, that was his ability to tap into that. And then there's such these beautiful simplistic teachings that also look at the constructs of good and evil. And I'm getting away from myself now, but I wanted to bring that up because it's so interesting.
Yeah.
Especially in the context of the regime, which is so oppressive, and you know they're going after people on the thing. It's enmity against God. They're saying that, you know, these protesters are the devil, like women who don't cover their heads are devil, you know. And so it's so baked into. It's just so interesting like the experience in the country, and these ideologies that grow and shape and form, and then become laws and rules that then harm people and kill people.
Oh yeah, and you know, this is another thing that I've learned more and more through talking to people and just kind of doing my own research, is like the Islamic, you know, the people in charge right now, they've been instilling this fear. There's always been this thing about like, you know, death to America, death to anyone that's against us, kind of thing. And they've been doing this in like mosques. You know, people go for prayer. It's like it's drilled into people's minds. This like fear, always be on guard, fearful, 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 and it's, you know, that's going to mess with the population over time. You know, and so much trauma and so much heavy fear. And then speaking of fear, the other thing, kind of to bring it back to what we've been seeing with these protests and everything inside of Iran, these people have reached this point, and it's Gen Z, you know, like they say, a lot of the younger generation, generally speaking, I think that's kind of where you'll see people coming out and rising up, is like the younger generation that is I guess you could argue they're more naive in a way, but you need to have some of that naivety to actually make some change happen, or believe that some change can happen. Because, you know, as we get older, we become more cynical, and, you know, the system and all this kind of thing, right? But what we're seeing is that people are reaching the point where, like, you know, this threshold of fear is being surpassed, and they're like, I got nothing to lose. I'm going to go out in the streets, and there's a good chance that I'm going to get shot and killed. You know, they're shooting kids in the eyes, in the genitals. You know, this is what they're doing. So there've been lots of kids that went blind, you know, in one of their eyes from this. But like, they're going out there literally risking their lives. You know, this is peaceful protest. This is coming out, voicing their concerns, and they've reached this fear threshold, which is scary for the regime, because, you know, if the regime feels like they have control of everybody, that's great. But once they see that people are not scared of them anymore, that's when shit gets real. You know, that's when like yeah, and that's what we've been seeing. So yeah. Anyway, it's kind of like talking like about that. It does give me some hope. You know, obviously there's been a lot of deaths and a lot of people that have been detained, and um, but uh, but the regime knows that this is a problem for them. That needs to be addressed if they want to hold on to power, and that's what they're doing. They're using force. So
They're using force in the country and outside of the country. You're just telling me about an organization in London that had to move to LA because they were advocating against the regime.
yeah, yeah. I mean, no, it wasn't that they were advocating against the regime, but they're so inside Iran. The news that we get, they don't allow foreign reporters inside of Iran. So this is kind of the thing. So everything is controlled by the regime. That propaganda is being sent out through their news agencies. The only outdoor news sources outside of Iran that report on Iran, they're owned by foreign other governments. So like Iran International, this one you were talking about, they have a base in the UK. They do reporting that it may be slightly biased, but it's reporting that's not coming from the regime directly. So they'll find other sources, people inside the country that report to them or have other ways. And so yeah, the thing is the regime has its tentacles all around the world, and there's all these different cases of these spies, these people that are out looking out for the regime and causing trouble or being hired to threaten people, what have you, abducting people, all that kind of thing. So yeah, this news agency, they ended up moving locations because I think their staff were getting too many threats, likely. There's another woman named Mahsa Amini, and she has been very outspoken against the regime. She lives in New York. There's people have their own viewpoints of who she is or what she's up to and all that kind of thing. But she's been very vocal, and the FBI got involved. There were three Eastern European guys that have ties to the Islamic Republic, and that were trying to basically take a hit on her. They were gonna shoot her, kill her in broad daylight, and so the FBI captured those guys. So these guys are all over the place, and yeah, and it ties back to that whole thing about fear. Like I know people that have left Iran have been here for many years, but people don't talk about certain things in the community because there's this fear that lack of trust. You don't know who's listening. You don't know this whole thing about Big Brother. Like it's a real thing, and I haven't realized it until more recently in the past year or so that how widespread it is in our community and how that fear, that trauma exists. So yeah.
Yeah, I hear that, and it makes me think of the infighting I've seen in organizations and communities fighting for liberation, and how we're all in survival mode, and responding, and it's how difficult it is to trust. I think really is that people are struggling with trust because they've been inundated. Their whole lives have been on edge in a way
Yeah.
because either they've grown up in these spaces where they're violently oppressed or they're subtly oppressed in like we all are in this modern paradigm of separation and having to achieve the cost of living and so on. But it's so powerful to know that there's so many people out there fighting with 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 full abandon. I can't know what that's like here in Canada because
No.
when I go out, like it's fairly people can risk going out here and protesting without thinking that they might be shot. That would be very, very unlikely here. Whereas there, people are going, they have nothing left to lose, and the videos that are coming out are mind opening, heart opening, because what power there is there in people who are just not backing down. And it seems clear that that something is changing. I know you've been asked a lot what's happened in the past year, what's changed, and it's hard to answer because the oppressive regime is still in place, and what's the clear pathway forward. But people are continuing to fight and rise up, and it's growing. the movement is growing.
Yeah, it is. And, like when you're talking about this whole thing about fear and people risking their lives, like, I don't know. I think about this a lot because a lot of the people, like I was born and raised here. I've never been to Iran. And so a lot of people that I've met that are generally, fairly recently moved from Iran or, grew up in Iran most of their lives. I can't help but think like I'm born in 1984. That would have been during the time of the regime. I would have been born into this. I could have been one of those students that were shot down, like in 2009, I guess, during the Green Revolution, for example. That was one of the times, big uprising. I could easily, I was in university, just finished the university around that time. So I could easily been one of those kids, wrong place at the wrong time or whatever, that was gunned down, so I definitely think about that and, you count your blessings every day and all that kind of thing. But yeah, it's continuing. Like I was saying before, it's like the fire is still burning below the ashes. Like it seems like things have kind of quieted down, but there will be more uprisings, more significant than the last. And I do feel like this last one was quite significant. It got a lot more attention worldwide, I believe, and I also, and again, I don't know, this is totally my perception, but I feel like more people in the diaspora have gotten involved or become more aware. And I think that's also credit to the younger generation. I feel like the younger generation has this different level of self-awareness, and are kind of like looking out for these types of issues that are taking place. And so, yeah, it seems like more people have been educating themselves, and that message has been spreading, and yeah, that's going to help. I mean, we're still getting a lot of lip service from governments, foreign governments. When we ask, the demands have been stop doing business with the Islamic Republic, basically, like stop making deals like this nuclear deal. If they got nuclear power, they're going to use it. Like it's like kind of if you make deals with them and relieve sanctions, yes, the idea is that it's going to help the people in the country get more access to resources and things. But the fact is that the Islamic Republic does not give a shit about the people in Iran and are not supporting the people in Iran. So that's just kind of filling their pockets as a result. So, putting them on the terrorist list, we've been asking about this for years, and there's just excuses and it's just the same old kind of thing, unfortunately, from Western governments, I'd say. But all the people want is to get rid of this regime and for Iran to be able to run its own secular democracy. That's kind of the main message. They should be able to govern themselves. They've got tens of thousands of prisoners, political prisoners, right now in jail inside Iran. They have brilliant minds. These are brilliant people that are doing work from inside prisons, and then also people in the diaspora that are just waiting for an opportunity to go home, and to run their own government. This is kind of the thing. It's like Iran's never been given the opportunity to rule itself, and so yeah, so that's kind of what we're still pushing for, and I hope to go visit Iran. I will go at one point, ideally that's going to be when the regime has fallen, which would be a great time to go and celebrate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you. We'll share some links in the bio for places people can follow and stay up to date with what's going on so they can continue to be engaged. What I'm hearing is no business with terrorists. They are terrorists and there should be no business done with them, and that our governments need to be firm with that. And beyond that, for people to hold that awareness, I think is important to recognize that the Islamic Republic needs to be dealt with in an immediate matter of seriousness. Is there anything else that you want them to know or advocate for? Any action steps they can take?
Yeah, I think the main thing would be to educate yourself on what's happening. I can send you some kind of book links. There's a couple of podcasts that I could recommend too. Just try to learn a little bit more about what's taking place. Ask your friends if you have any Iranian friends. Ask them if they know some updates. But yeah, I think when people kind of understand the issues and have more awareness around that, I think they will realize that that's not like a reality that anybody should live, you know. And this is kind of what I keep going back to is when I see these stories. Um, there's so many stories of how ruthless and brutal this regime is, and I'm looking at this. I'm like, how can somebody be living in this situation? And I understand this is like, you know, the world is there's a lot of suffering in the world, and a lot of countries, a lot of places where people are suffering, and so you know that empathy. I think when people have more awareness and understanding, they'll have more empathy. And yeah, you know, we have the ability to speak out. We can contact and harass our politicians to, you know, to kind of help change some of these viewpoints that are currently held in the government. I mean, we follow the U.S. In fact, unfortunately, Canadians, you know, like the government just does whatever the U.S. does, and so it's difficult. But the more people that we have pushing for change, you know, better chance we have at actually seeing it. So yeah.
Right on. Wow. Thank you so much for joining us. It's
Okay.
been really
Thank you.
nice talking. Thanks.
See ya.